Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Cyber Cookie. I am Darragh Reynolds and I'll be your host, and today we are joined by a very special guest, Jacques Sauve. Jacques is CEO of a cybersecurity consulting company in Canada, and we'll be finding out about Jacques' journey in cybersecurity, what the landscape looks like in Canada and how it compares to Ireland. We'll also be discussing the Canadian CyberSecure framework for SMBs and what learnings we can take for that. If you like what you hear, please follow, like and share our podcast on whatever platform you're listening to right now, so we can reach a wider audience. Now, without further ado, let's dive in. Hey Jacques, how are you? Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, sir. I'm grand, as you would say in Ireland. So good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you are. Good night, if you're listening to this at night.
Yeah, that's the beauty of podcasts. Anytime, right. 24/7, even on the treadmill, unfortunately.
There you go.
For some of us. Great to see you again. We've a little bit of a history, so Jacques, I'll let you explain what that is now in a minute. But you're joining us from Quebec this morning?
I am from southeastern Quebec, close to the U.S. border with Vermont. So for those who don't know, Quebec was founded by the French. So my descendants, my ancestors came here over 400 years ago from France to fight in the Indian Wars. And the Sauves have been here ever since. And so today within Canada, Quebec is still very predominantly French. We're kind of the, we stand out like a sore thumb within North America. But hey, it's a beautiful culture and language, and it's a beautiful area of the world too.
A little bit of European culture.
There you go.
Extended to the other side of the world. I know it's great, and I really love that translate now button on LinkedIn. It lets me see exactly what you're talking about.
I figure when you start commenting and liking my posts that are in French, then I'm going like, okay, either he's been really deep diving into French or he's using the translate button.
Yeah, no, I have leaving cert French, all right, but it doesn't extend that far. Actually, reading is not too bad, but speaking is a whole different kettle of fish. But that's the beauty of the Irish educational system. But perhaps you're a CEO of your own business, so you might get into that. But just could you let our listeners know how you got into cybersecurity in the first place, Jacques?
Yes, it's a long story. I've been in IT now for over 33 years. Hence, for those who can't see us, the gray hair. But I started back in the early 90s. Obviously, at that time, as anybody with gray hair or no more hair will remember, it was all Novell networks everywhere. So I started my career with Novell networks, and I fought with that till 2016. So I was one of the last. I had my own consulting company back then. At one point, we had up to 15 employees. We were doing Novell projects all over North America, and it was really cool. We were probably the last Novell Platinum partner at least in Canada. And so I got to travel quite a bit across North America. At one point, I even got invited down to Sydney, Australia by a partner over there to work on something called Novell Vibe and to train them and to go meet their customers. So really cool. Ended up closing that in 2016 because obviously the Novell market disappeared. And
that was prior to Windows, was it, or around the same time?
No, well, so a few things happened in 2016. One, by then, Novell had already been sold or acquired maybe 2 times within the space of 3 years. So people were kind of losing confidence. And then the other thing that was happening was we were seeing Microsoft 365 starting up and blooming, and so a lot of people were just throwing in the towel and moving to Microsoft. And when my fault, I'll take it on my shoulders. I was not quick enough to rebrand the company in terms of letting people know that we were also doing Microsoft. I had some guys who were absolutely brilliant with Microsoft, with AD and whatever we needed. I was doing some Microsoft 365 myself, but to most of our customers, we were the Novell guys. And so I ended up closing that in 2016, went to work for a buddy of mine that I've known for, at this point, over 30 years. He had a company. They were out of Montreal. And at the time, I was living out in Western Canada. I moved to Western Canada in 2014 to help expand, my market, my company over there. And we were doing quite well because oil and gas in Alberta. So for those who don't know Alberta is kind of the Texas of Canada. That's where all the oil and gas is. So lots of money. But ended up closing that. And I went to work for my buddy who's had a company out of Montreal. They were doing e-discovery software. So, indexing, Exchange, GroupWise, whatever, file system so that you could do e-discovery against it. Really cool. I learned about, at this point, I got into the world of information governance, which was a whole different thing from networking and all that stuff. And I did some certifications in that. It was interesting. It's not a passion of mine. It's an important part of cybersecurity, but it's not a passion of mine. Now, to be fair, at this point, I'm not touching cybersecurity at all. But we'll get back to that later. Cybersecurity essentially is good IT hygiene. You take care of your foundation properly, well, you've already got a good foundation for your cybersecurity. So, anyways, 2020, his company wasn't, I wouldn't say not doing too well, but there were some issues with sales and stuff, and I was let go along with a few others. And so at that point, oil had gone down tremendously, the price of oil. And so, Calgary, Alberta wasn't doing really well. We had a very left-wing socialist government that was essentially ruining the province.
Yeah.
And
if only a global pandemic or something came along.
No, not yet. Push up
the price of oil.
So I lost my job, in the fall of 2019. So the pandemic was just on the horizon. Nobody knew what that was going to turn into yet. Yeah. And so I looked at my wife and I said, okay, well, where is there a lot of technology? We didn't want to move back to Quebec, but where are there opportunities in terms of technology and everything? And of course, I thought of Ireland. Ireland is huge when it comes to technology, right? And so I said, and we'd gone in 2015 to visit. We loved it. We both had the sense of, oh yeah, I could live here. And so I said to her, should I look for something? And I came over to Ireland in January 2020, job hunting. And that's where I went to work for someone where you were, right? And that's where you and I got to meet, and we had a lot of great discussions and all that. And, but yeah, 3 weeks after we got there, everything shut down.
Yeah, it was really unfortunate.
It was.
I do recall being at a conference with you, and you were one of the key speakers at the conference. It was a room full of accountants.
Yes. And
you got up on stage and you said, what if something happened and you couldn't go into your office on Monday? What would you do? And that was a really, really important question, because I could see the vibe in the room, people looking very serious and stern. I think at that stage, digital transformation was only kind of getting off the ground. I think people said, well, look, I'd still get, email on my phone, but like after that, I'm in big trouble, So that memory is etched in my brain from our trip to Cork that day, and Cork, that was one of my first kind of experiences with you. Obviously you're a very inspiring speaker, and that was one of my first experiences with you on that. So, so
things didn't turn out, unfortunately, in Ireland. We were so happy to be there. We love Ireland. We love the Irish people. Your dairy products are out of this world. The Clonakilty breakfast sausage on the weekend. Oh man, you pointed me to that. Loved it, and I missed that tremendously. So we absolutely miss Ireland, but for all sorts of reasons, personal and professional, and of course the biggest one being the pandemic. I was dealing at the time with 5 recruiting firms across Ireland, because as you remember, part of my job was hiring technical folks, and I told them at this point, it's like, look for something for me at this point, right, and help me relocate and
in front of this thing,
and then but everything was shut down. Nobody was hiring. So 6 months later, August, we decided to just pack it up and come back to Quebec for all sorts of reasons. And look, we've settled in the country. But when I came back, I said I wasn't too sure where I was gonna end up. And some of my buddies, including that guy that I worked for in the e-discovery world, he sent some opportunities my way. And I ended up, again, finding myself consulting with SMB customers. And I love SMB customers. I've worked with, all sorts of companies from SMB to huge enterprise. My favorite is by far the SMB
what are you talking about? 25 employees?
Oh, anything 500? From 5 to 100, 200, Here in Quebec, just like Ireland, Quebec and Canada is made up 90% of SMBs. So companies. Very typical to find companies 10 to 25 users. That's probably the bulk of our market. And I love working with these folks because, one, I have a love of entrepreneurship. I admire these entrepreneurs, these builders of our economy, both in Ireland and Canada.
Risk takers and
the ones who take the risk to build something and hire people, right? They're without them, we wouldn't really have much. Mm-hmm. And I really, so I came back and I started consulting, but based on some of my experiences in Ireland, where I noticed that, wow, entrepreneurs are really not addressing cybersecurity. That's a huge issue. And so I started delving into that world and got into it. I got introduced to some folks. We have an amazing cybersecurity community here in Quebec. We have something called the Hack Fest every fall, and it's a French conference. It usually takes place in Quebec City or close to. It is the biggest French hack fest in North America. So
it's
very cool. I got
or something like that. It's like B-sides. Have you ever heard of B-sides?
Yeah, something like that. So there's sessions
peer-to-peer.
and presentations, and so I got involved too very early in March of 2021. I got introduced to one of the founders of Hackfest, and they have a podcast here in Quebec called La French Connection. It's a French podcast, but we call it La French Connection, where we talk about topics around cybersecurity, and I've been doing that with them now for 3 years. I've presented twice at the Hackfest. I love presenting. You were just mentioning the presentation at Cork. And then I started my own podcast last year where I interview folks from the cybersecurity industry to find out how they got to where they are today in cybersecurity. I got to tell you, Darragh, at this point in my career, 33 plus years into my IT career, my biggest regret is that I did not get into cybersecurity earlier, because it is a fascinating field. Very interesting. Well, at least for geeks like me. It's a fascinating field. It's really interesting.
What a ride! The last 10 years, what a ride! Every morning you wake up, you check the internet news feeds, and there's breaches all over the world. It's some of the biggest companies in the world, supply chain, ransomware, you name it. Hacking groups coming out of China, coming out of Russia, the battle between Russia and Ukraine on a digital front is really captivating. And then if you can bring that back into your own business where it's B2B, and you're helping your client safeguard their business, their reputation, their digital assets, their financial certainty as well. You're doing something for the greater good as well, and I think that's a huge part of why we love this industry so much.
Yeah, and just to use some of the terminology that we can introduce to your listeners, in cybersecurity, we have what's called red team, blue team, or offensive, defensive, right? So red team would be the pen testers. People, I think, like you guys, offer those services where companies can pay you to see if you can hack into their systems. It's vital work, right? You need to see where the vulnerabilities are. Blue team or defensive is what I do. Is I help customers or these small businesses put in place mitigations against these cyber attacks. Like, what can we do to help prevent a cyber attack? All the protections, because cybersecurity is not one thing. I call it Shrek's onion. Remember Shrek, the movie? And they go out, he goes off with Donkey, and he goes, and Donkey's asking a bunch of questions, and he goes, and Shrek goes, well, ogres are like onions. And Donkey goes, they stink? He goes, no, layers. They have layers, right? Onions have layers, ogres have layers. Analogy, Well, so I call it Shrek's onion because that's what cybersecurity is. It's layers of protections. It's not one thing you do.
Yeah, I think a lot of people put a lot of stock into endpoint protection and stuff like that, thinking it's a one for all solution. But as we know, if a hacker really wants to hack you, they'll get in. It's how you respond. It's how your defense mechanisms kick in. It's how well your data is backed up, encrypted, all that kind of stuff. So there's multiple layers to it. So and that's what we're in business to do. Provide those layers and work with individual customers and see what their requirements are and what their appetite and budget and everything else is. And I think that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to speak to you today was around, I saw you making comments around CyberSecure Canada. For our listeners, would you like to just inform us of what that is and what the mission of CyberSecure Canada is?
For sure. So CyberSecure Canada is a cybersecurity framework that was designed for small business. Now, it was put together, I think, initially by Industry Canada. They define small business as 500 or less employees, which, for Canada and Quebec is, we get into the medium of the SME, right? And so it's a list of controls. It started off as something, I think it was 14 or 16 controls. They modified the list January 2023. They came out with a new document, a new standard. And it is now 18 controls. And so it's divided into, well, first we have what's called the organizational controls. There are 4 of them. And these deals with leadership. Like who And it's funny because at the last Hackfest, I took one of my customers with me who got his cybersecurity certification back in October. I asked him, hey, would you mind presenting with me and talking about your experiences getting through? And he's a small engineering firm of 15 employees. That's it, right? And he aimed for this. And he told everybody on stage, he says, look, if you don't have the backing of your CEO and upper management and leadership, then forget it. Don't even start down that path, right? The entrepreneur himself, the leader, has to understand that cybersecurity is something important. So it starts with leadership and then accountability. Who is accountable for this effort of securing your business? Then we get into cybersecurity training. Well, what are you doing to train your employees in terms of cybersecurity? Because that's important. Your employees have access to your systems, your data, your credentials. They all have part of the responsibility on their shoulders. So it's very important to train. And it's not a question of making them cybersecurity experts. Just teach them about why it's important.
It's culture.
And teach them about
cultivating a culture in the business. Yeah.
Exactly, and teach them about some of the tactics used by the cyber bad guys, it's got to be. I always tell the customers, it's cybersecurity to some extent has to be part of your corporate discussion. Like you don't want to get on everybody's nerves every day with it, but during your monthly meetings or weekly meetings, just a little item on the agenda to talk. Hey, people, remember, be careful. We'd rather you be more suspicious than less. And then the last organizational control is about risk assessment. So they encourage you to do a risk assessment. What are the potential cyber risks to your organization? Now, those are the 4 organizational controls. I find them boring. I mean, you have to do them, but that's not my favorite part. The next ones are what's called the baseline controls, and that's where I enjoy working, the technical stuff. Right? So stuff like having an incident response plan. Like how many organizations have a response plan? Right? They wait till it's too late. Oh, what do we do now? Everything's been
printed out in paper, so it's not locked in your system.
Printed out in paper. and yes, part of the audit is show me that you have a paper copy of your incident response plan.
Nice.
And then there's some very basic stuff, such as making sure you're patching your operating systems and your applications. You're enabling security software, right? So antivirus, anti-malware, EDR, XDR, whatever you're using. Securely configure your devices. Yeah, it's unbelievable how some people work, especially small businesses. They work as, they using admin accounts on their workstations all the time, or they work as Microsoft 365 administrators all the time. Like, no, you don't do that. Using strong authentication for all your applications and stuff, like 2-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, right? We keep hammering that in. But I always warn, and I think you saw my post on LinkedIn earlier this week or late last week, where I was thinking, we like to scream MFA from the top of all the roofs, right? But don't get this false sense of security. There is still a lot of possibilities to capture an MFA login and still get into a system. So we got to be careful. Backup and encrypt your data. Well, of course, make sure you have good backups. Establish basic perimeter defenses. So make sure you've got a good firewall, VPN, all that stuff, so that you're protecting your data. And then, of course, we talk about access control and authorization, right? So how are you authenticating your users and providing access to the data? So, and then the last set of controls has to do, they call it controls by operating environment. So you have to look at secure mobility. So what are you doing about mobile devices? Users
does that cover remote workers as well?
Yeah, remote workers, so they're home PCs, but also their iPhones and tablets, and they all want to connect. And then you have the same dilemma where a lot of people, a lot of organizations, especially SMEs, it's all BYOD, right? It's personal devices. And so employees are often like, well, I don't want you to control my device, right? No way. But, they want to install Outlook and SharePoint and Teams, and they want to have access to all your corporate data. So, hey, buddy, let's compromise a little bit here. Of course, if people are using stuff like Microsoft Intune and stuff, well, they can sandbox those Microsoft applications and protect the data, right? If you're outsourcing your IT services, well, how confident are you that, Microsoft is protecting your data, or whatever external organization that you're outsourcing to is protecting your data? Secure websites, secure portable data. Well, and one easy one is point of sale or financial systems. And in this one, they talk about being PCI compliant if you're taking payments and PCI compliant. Now, sure, if you're in retail, if you're working with customers who have retail outlets and cash, you have to deal with that. So you have to justify how that data is protected. I've not had a customer, retail customer yet. And honestly, most of the customers fall into one of two categories here for me in the SMB market. One is either they don't take credit card payments, right? It's business to business. Or if they do, they use a third party like Stripe.
Yeah.
And so they offload that,
Sure.
that responsibility. And then having logs, gather your logs, make sure you're logging events. Right. So that's cybersecurity in a nutshell, Cybersecure Canada. So it's a question of, like any cybersecurity framework, deploying those controls, making sure you're putting them into production, and then documenting them. Right. It's important to document with evidence. Yeah, sure. We do MFA. Here's a screenshot of, how everybody has MFA enforced. And then once you've documented all that, well, you just, here in Canada, we have three organizations that are accredited auditors. And so you call up one of these auditors and you go, hey, they audit all your controls. They look at everything you've documented. They do checks and they go, yep, okay, he's walking the talk. And so you get your Cybersecure Canada certification, which is good for 2 years.
And your badge on your email, signature, website, the whole lot, so your customers can see, hey, I've walked the walk, I've talked the talk. I can now say for sure that I'm doing my best in terms of cybersecurity controls and
So I always tell people, look, there's a marketing aspect to this. To your point, you can put on your website, email signatures, product brochures, whatever. It basically just lets your employees, customers, partners, potential investors know that you've done the work.
Sure. And do you walk them? Had you helped them with the controls? Because it sounds like there's a lot there. Whatever 18 controls. It sounds like there's a lot of work to do there. So, is that something that you would help them with? And do they get any financial assistance from the government?
Yes, there are. This particular customer that I spoke about, who came to present with me at Hackfest, he did get some funding from a federal program called IRAP, the Industrial Research Assistance Program, because he does R&D and engineering, and so he's part of that program, and he was able to get some funding to help pay for my time to help him. Most SMEs would not have all the skills and knowledge necessary to put all these things into practice. So just like any cybersecurity framework, you need a company like ComSec to accompany you and help you down that path. But it's well worth it, because you guys know what to do, you know how to do it, you know why to do it. And then you work with the customer to put these things into place, and then they get certifications. But whether it's Cybersecure Canada or the CIS controls or NIST or whatever, ISO 27001, which is typically too big for most SMEs. And then we could talk later. You guys look at you're developing. Ireland is developing its own cybersecurity framework. Here's the key, though. What I always tell my customers: the goal should not be the certification. The goal of doing the work should be that, hey, you're protecting your company, right? Because there's a number that goes around in the cybersecurity world, and I don't know if you guys use it. The only problem is we don't know from what study it comes from, but we say that it is said that 60% of SMEs who suffer a serious cyber attack go bankrupt. They can't recover.
Yeah, I've seen that stat, yeah.
Right? So Mr. and Mrs. Entrepreneur who may be listening to us, do you really want to lose your business because of, a cyber attack, a cyber incident? No, you don't. Not after all the years you have work you may have put into it, the effort, right? The blood, sweat, and tears, as we say, and the money. So the goal should not be the certification. The goal is protecting your company. The result is the certification. Hey, cool, there's a reward, right? But don't do it for the certification. Do it to protect your company.
Got it. Yeah, that's a really strong message, Jacques. Thanks for that. That's really good. So I think Cybersecure Canada, it's a bit like what we're trying to do here in Ireland. So it's a framework for SMBs. At the moment, it's called CI4, which stands for Cyber Ireland 4, under the 4 pillars. So it's probably like the four measures that you were speaking about before, the control measures. So in terms of governance and risk. So that's what's happening there. That's what's happening here in Ireland. So that's yet to be put through the national safety authorities to give a proper certification at the end of it. So I think it's kind of similar in that respect. And so, if I'm not mistaken, it's in action now. The last 2 to 3 years in Canada. And what's the uptake been like in it from the SME community?
It has been absolutely pathetic. And that is because
sorry to hear that.
Sorry to put it that way. But the reason is, government failure. There are two words that are not an oxymoron. But it has been the absolute failure of our federal government to market this to SMBs, to say, hey guys, you should be doing this. Like, you should be looking into it. Unfortunately, I just read last week that there's only something like 41 businesses in Canada that have gotten their certification. I'm proud that one of them is my
population of
customer.
40 million people. Yeah,
exactly. So it's a marketing issue. So, lessons learned for Ireland. Well, if you're going to put together a framework, or if the government or whoever's, or some security committee is going to put together a framework, make sure it gets marketed out to your SME market. And don't forget to explain to them why they should care. And I'm sure, I don't know, maybe you can tell me if you're seeing the same thing in Ireland. The biggest issue we have here is cybersecurity is not important to these entrepreneurs. They don't think about this. Or, as my favorite line that I always say, because I'm often in the media here in Quebec and Canada, I'll often say, cybersecurity isn't really important until it becomes important, right? And then it's too late. So the challenge was that
oh shit moment.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. And so, and companies like ComSec, I see your posts on LinkedIn. You're trying to bring that top of mind to entrepreneurs, but the government has to do its part too. That to give, I don't know, some kind of incentive to companies to reach that certification. Again, I'm saying don't make the certification the goal. The goal is protect your business. But why would entrepreneurs do it? And that's the message that's very difficult to get through to entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I think in one way as well, we've seen some certification or some compliance regulations coming in from the EU and from the Irish government around critical industries such as oil, water, natural resources, healthcare, financial markets around. There's a legislation called, well, you mentioned NIS2 and DORA. So there will be regulatory requirements on the large organizations to put in these cybersecurity measures, but also their supply chain. So that's where the SMB comes into it as well. So we're now seeing our customers getting surveys and to fill in their cybersecurity details. If they want to either work for a larger organization, provide services into them, or if they want to be part of that supply chain.
Yep. Yeah.
So
and I know
have you seen anything like that in Canada?
I can tell you that in the cybersecurity community, we wish there would be that kind of pressure on SMBs to say, hey, if you're not CyberSecure Canada, we're not going to deal with you. That would be one way to put pressure on these companies. Well,
that's what happened in the UK with Cyber Essentials.
Right.
We've seen both UK and Irish companies taking up that framework or certification, and it's similar. It's audited as well by registered companies. You won't get the business if you don't have the certification. So
exactly, there has to be some kind of pressure to do
incentive,
it. Yeah. And I looked at your Cyber Essentials, or the UK Cyber Essentials, and it seems to be like almost a subset of CyberSecure Canada, although they address a lot of the same things. I mean, essentially, it's not rocket science, right? It's always the same things, and until maybe you guys get your own framework. I encourage SMEs to, look at CyberSecure Canada. Look at the controls. You don't have to, never mind about caring about getting the certification, but put the controls in place. Look at the CIS controls. Look at, they're made for small businesses. You can do level 1 and start with that. Just start down the path. Talk to the folks at ComSec and get your, that's a question I often get. And where do I start? And I always say, well, start by deciding that it's important to do something about your cybersecurity to protect your assets and your identities, right? And then you guys, like folks like ComSec, can help with that sort of stuff. And so, yeah, I encourage anybody listening, if you've got a business, start caring about your cybersecurity. It's essential. It's a critical part of your business.
What's on the future? What's the future outlook for Canada and cybersecurity? Like I've seen Canada ranked, 37th globally, for security. US was 43rd and Australia was 41st. So is there? I know particularly Canadian organizations have been the target of a lot of large-scale cyber attacks. I saw the Banking Federation or the Banking Watchdog, saying it's increasing high-impact attacks on its members.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've seen
in recent year.
Last year in Canada, one of the things we did see the most of is DDoS, denial of service attacks on some of our Canadian websites from a pro-Russian group. They're No Name, which is, I don't think they've gone after, I follow them on Instagram. I don't think they've gone after Ireland too much. They keep hopping from one country to the next, but they started on Canada back in May last year, I think. And it's just denial of service attacks, right? You send so many requests to a website that you can't reach the website. And then Canada got into a spat with India last year, about in August. So we had some Indian groups that were doing the same thing to Canada. We've not seen any huge, serious cyber attacks on our critical infrastructure like energy, transportation, water treatment, communications. We haven't seen any of that, at least nowhere near what we expected with the whole geopolitical situation, because Canada has been supporting Ukraine in their war against Russia. We've sent tanks, we've sent billions of dollars, but some of us kind of expected to see some cyber attacks against our critical infrastructure. Sorry, but it hasn't really materialized. It's the biggest issue we see are small municipalities, private businesses, SMBs, what we've been talking about, that are getting hit. Right?
Getting hit by recreational cyber attacks or cyber crime.
Yeah, well, recreational. No, it's huge business. It's huge business. Huge business.
It's not really recreational. What was the word I was looking for? It's it's like ransomware as a service. It's
ransomware as a service, exactly.
It's these groups that are organized to make money. People through Bitcoin and everything else.
Oh yeah. There's lots of fraud, lots of phishing. It's a bit sad, but I always tell people we live in a world now where you absolutely have to be suspicious of everything, borderline paranoid. Be wary of everything that doesn't look right, isn't.
Yeah.
So, and especially now, one topic that we haven't touched at all, but now, especially with the rise of AI, right? I was going to say that, and deep fakes and all that stuff. I mean, AI is amazing. You can do some amazing stuff with it, right?
Unbelievable. I've messed around. I'm a bit of an AI enthusiast, and I've been messing around with it. And considering 15 months ago, we weren't using it as a consumer level, and now we are, and now we're using the APIs and creating customer service bots. Not that we do that, but some companies use customer service bots and all this kind of stuff. But it's you're saying deepfakes.
Deepfakes, yeah.
We saw it in Hong Kong, a recent attack where they had faked the whole meeting with the CEO with some of the staff, asking them to make a bank transfer. So and cut them all out. So that's
so have keywords, have passwords that you can verify that really is the person that you're talking to. That's one tactic.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are afraid of AI. They think, it's going to give the bad guys more tools to hack into our networks faster. But hey, don't forget, it's also going to give. Hey,
what's your safe word?
Yeah, it's also going to give us defenders some very valuable tools. I've been looking at all the demos of Microsoft Security Copilot, and it looks absolutely amazing. When are we going to have access to that? I don't know. It's supposed to be this year. But it will also simplify defenders' jobs in terms of looking for signs and
we've seen it in cybersecurity tools, SIEM tools, SOAR tools, that sort of thing, where escalation of alerts and stuff like that. So it's been very useful in that respect. So look, you fight fire with fire. It's a double-edged sword. You got to be careful with it. I think one thing in Ireland, on a consumer level, we've been plagued with smishing. we've seen with a recent attack in the MGM in Las Vegas that there was a phishing attack, social engineering attack of an IT worker who rang up looking for a password, credentials and got them.
A $39 billion company got had by a 10-minute phone call. Think of that, right?
There you go.
There's no hacking involved. They just called up and asked for a password.
And that's where your training comes in. That's where the cybersecurity training comes in. And yeah, look, and how's the needle moving in terms of awareness for cybersecurity in Canada? Is it moving in the right direction?
I'd like to think so. We have something called the Canadian CyberSecurity Center. They do a lot of work trying to get the word out about stuff. But I often, like I said, I often get involved in local media. By local, I mean the province of Quebec, the French news channel. Actually, in about 45 minutes, I'm getting interviewed about some other stuff, some other cybersecurity stuff. And they always say, well, what do we do? And I keep telling the media folks, like, well, keep doing what you're doing. Talk about it. Yeah. Right? Get guys like me and some of my colleagues. We're a few here in the province that we're always in the media and talking about these issues. And I always tell them, just keep talking about it, make noise about it. Like, that's how people will hear about it. But in terms of, unfortunately, I'd like to tell you, we're heading in the right direction. Unfortunately, we don't have great leadership here in Canada right now. Everything's fallen apart. Our current prime minister, I think, is finished. And there's a scandal exploding here around what's called the ArriveCan app, which was developed during the pandemic for Canadians coming back into Canada. And it was supposed to be an application that was supposed to cost $80,000. It has now ballooned to something like $60 million. And It's starting to smell like a huge scandal. So, citizens' trust in our governments, unfortunately, has gone down the toilet.
We have a similar situation with a children's hospital. And our TV, our national broadcaster as well.
Yeah, RTE. I know. I've seen RTE has gone absolutely woke. I've seen some interviews, and oh my God, they've gone completely off their rocker.
When times are obviously tough with cost of living and inflationary measures coming in to curb that, it's difficult to see these large sums being spent, so poorly. So look, we won't go into that today. We're here to talk about cybersecurity.
But look, I think we'll finish up on. It's all good. You guys keep doing what you're doing. And spread the good word about cybersecurity and the need to take care of it. To try to bring that top of mind to entrepreneurs. Talk to the entrepreneurs, the owners of the companies. Let them know they stand to lose their business if they don't address it.
Yeah. So that's a wrap. Big thank you to Jacques Sauve for participating in our podcast today. I'll drop the links to Trilogian on the podcast description, so you can check out Jacques' services. Also, the links to ComSec as well. So that's it, and I hope to see you on the next podcast.